Hello everybody, welcome to The Take. I'm your host, Krishna Mano, and in today's episode, I will be interviewing former City Commissioner and current Mayor of Grand Rapids, Rosalynn Bliss. As the federal and state governments face many threats to American democracy, especially in recent times, it is essential to hear from the perspective of elected officials at the local level. So please help me welcome Mayor Rosalynn Bliss. Mayor Bliss, thank you so much for joining me in today's episode. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks. It's wonderful to join you.
Thank you. Could you please share a little bit about yourself, your childhood, and what you do now?
Sure. So a little bit, oh goodness, where do I start? Well, I can tell you I grew up in Sault Ste. Marie, so way in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I am from a big family, so I have 6 brothers and 3 sisters, and we're all just a year apart. So I'm from a very large, tight-knit family. People usually ask me what number I am, and I'm number 7. So I grew up in the Sioux, and then I went to University of South Alabama. So I packed up after I graduated from high school, and I went to South Alabama, and I lived in Mobile for 4 years. And did my undergraduate studies down there, got a degree in psychology and criminal justice. And then I moved here to Grand Rapids. So I've been in Grand Rapids since about 1996. And then I started working and then went to graduate school at Michigan State, got a degree in social work. So I have a master's degree in social work and started working in the field of domestic violence and child welfare. And then it was back in 2005, so about 17 years ago, I decided to run for office and ran to be a second ward city commissioner and was elected and served for 10 years on the commission before deciding to run for mayor.
Thank you. And touching more on your career, what pushed you, or what was the leading factor that led you to want to first be a city commissioner and then the mayor?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's interesting because when I was in college, I never thought I would run for office. So I really didn't envision myself running, being elected. I surely never envisioned myself as mayor. But I started getting really active in the community, largely around violence against women and violence against children issues. So I wanted to raise awareness around those issues. And I got to know an incredible group of women here in our city who care deeply about getting more women elected to office. So this was back in the early 2000s, so 2003, 4, 5, and there weren't a lot of women in elected office. And so I had a group of women who I became good friends with, and they were the ones that encouraged me to run for city commission. And then the big issue that I led on and I campaigned on was wanting to invest more money in our parks, making sure that every child who lived in our city had a playground that they could walk to, and then also to make sure that our city swimming pools were open for kids. So those are my big issues back in 2005.
Right. And like you described in the answer to the first question, you went to college at the University of South Alabama and studied psychology and criminal justice. What caused you to move to the South, and were there any experiences from there that have now impacted your worldview as the mayor?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. There were a couple of factors that impacted my decision to go south for school. So I'm from a big family, and I grew up poor. So my parents, they both worked jobs, but neither of them had gone to college. My dad actually didn't finish high school. And so my dad was a brick mason, and my mom worked at a local grocery store. And so I knew if I was going to go to college, I had to pay for it myself. And at the time, the universities and colleges down south were a lot less expensive. So I applied to all Southern schools, knowing that I had to pay the bill. And then also, I just wanted to get away from the snow. So that sounds kind of funny, but back then there was a lot of snow, more snow than there is today. And I was kind of sick of it. And I thought, here's an opportunity. Nothing's holding me back. I might as well go explore another part of our country that's warm. So I applied to all Southern schools and got accepted to all of them. And then South Alabama, they gave me an academic scholarship for my first year. And that's how I decided. It was very, as I said, not very strategic, but I do feel it was meant to be.
Right. And were there any experiences from the South that helped shape your career as the city commissioner and then the mayor?
Yeah. I had so many wonderful experiences. I think my formal education was unbelievably valuable. I changed my majors a few times, so it helped me kind of figure out what I was passionate about. When I was there, I volunteered at a nonprofit serving children who had experienced abuse, and I did tutoring. And it was there that I kind of figured out that I really loved working with kids. And then I had some incredible professors that really helped me better understand and value the importance of data and coupling data with good outcomes. We wanted, in my undergraduate studies, I did a lot of research, and I was able to work with some really incredible researchers and talk a lot about, we have to measure the impact we're trying to make, and it can't just be anecdotal, especially if we're trying to change systems. So that was really helpful for me. And then, just living in a different culture, I think that always expands your worldview. Alabama, especially Mobile, is very different than the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So it really just helped me expand, my understanding of the world.
Right. And there's a quote that I've heard that goes, without data, you're just another person with an opinion. And data has become such an integral part of our lives, especially as a majority of our world starts shifting towards tech and becomes tech dependent, right?
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
And in terms of current events, the unfortunate yet unavoidable world of mass shootings, and specifically those that occur in schools. I released an episode on this a couple of weeks ago, actually. And with the recent shootings at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, one at a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, and even one at Oxford High School in Michigan in November of 2021, just 150 miles away. What steps has the city of Grand Rapids taken to prevent a school or mass shooting in general?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking this question. It's personal to a lot of people, and unfortunately, I have a niece that goes to Oxford High School and was there that day of the shooting, and have seen firsthand just how unbelievably tragic it is to students. And then there's the trauma that all of us experience every time there's a shooting, especially in a high school. Every mass shooting is horrific, but I think it's been unbelievably tragic and traumatic as we all have watched these shootings unfold. So when I think about Grand Rapids, I think about a couple things. One is we have a really close partnership with Grand Rapids Public Schools and with other schools in the city of Grand Rapids. And GRPS has actually been, I'd say, very proactive even before these recent horrible mass shootings in schools. So for years, GRPS has been looking at safety measures, working really closely with their public safety department, doing a lot of communication with students and with parents about what their plan is, and not only around prevention, but if, a tragic event happens here. So a lot of the work I do as mayor is working in partnership and collaboration and make sure that I'm supporting the efforts of our schools to make sure they have the support they need to prevent any shooting. In fact, after this, I have a meeting. It's called the City School Liaison Committee meeting, and I serve on it with two of my colleagues on the commission and then 3 GRPS school board members, and we get together every other month and we talk about critical issues, and this is one of them. So that's part of it. But, the bigger issue around gun violence, in my opinion, is that we need stronger gun laws. We need stronger gun safety laws. And a lot of people have reached out to me since a number of these shootings, and they ask me to pass local ordinances around gun safety. And unfortunately, I don't have the authority to do that. So that's a statewide issue and a federal issue. In fact, here in Michigan, the state has preempted local units of government from doing a whole host of things locally. And one of them is passing any type of gun ordinances. So it's frustrating as a mayor to see these tragedies and to want to do something about it and to have your hands tied. And I think that's the sentiment of mayors, not just throughout the state of Michigan, but really throughout the country.
Right, and in January of this year, I had talked with Senator Debbie Stabenow, the senior senator from Michigan, and when I asked her a question similar to this about how to prevent school and mass shootings, she brought up mental health and gun laws, like you said, as the key factors. Is there anything that the federal government is supporting small cities and big cities like Grand Rapids with to help prevent these mass shootings?
Yeah, I'm glad that the federal government recently passed a bipartisan gun safety law. Personally, I think it's a good step, but I don't think it goes far enough, quite frankly. I think that assault weapons should be banned. Military style weapons should not be in the hands of our residents. Even stronger laws around requiring guns to be locked up and to be safe. We've had tragedies right here in our city where young people get a hold of a gun and they accidentally shoot another child. And I understand the desire for people to have a weapon, but there's huge responsibility that should come with that. And so, I'm grateful that the federal government was able to move forward some bipartisan legislation, but I think a whole lot more needs to be done. And I think mental health funding is critical as well. But the accessibility of guns, in my opinion, is at the crux of the issue.
Definitely. And on the topic of threats to American democracy, which is unfortunately one of the most popular topics during this unprecedented time, last week there was a major event that shocked all of America. The Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the precedents that allowed women to get an abortion. And this sparked many protests across the country, even a couple in Grand Rapids, because a simple yet essential right and freedom for women was taken away. And what many of us are wondering is, where do we go from here, right? Like, what does this mean for Michiganders, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, that's another, it's so interesting and reflecting on this past week, because even when the leak came out that the Supreme Court was gonna take this up and overturn Roe v. Wade, I think some of us, I'll just speak for myself, I really didn't think it was going to happen. I never thought that I would see this day in my lifetime. And I think I share a lot of shock and outrage with a lot of other individuals in our city. And I think expressing that outrage is absolutely appropriate and necessary. But when I think about what are we going to do to protect abortion rights and access to abortion, I don't have a lot of faith that the federal government is going to do anything or be able to get something passed. So we have to take the fight to the state level. So to me, the initial thing is we have to overturn this 1931 law that's been on the books forever. So I know the governor is actively working on that, but in my opinion, we need to take it up. We can't trust the elected officials in Lansing or in DC right now, especially with it being mixed. You have Republicans in power, and that, like in Michigan, in the House and the Senate, and obviously the governor is Democratic. It's a very small margin at the federal level. I think we have to take it into our own hands. We need a petition on the ballot that we can all vote for, that passes, and then it's codified within the Constitution. I think that is the only way if we're really going to protect the rights to do it. The unfortunate thing is leaving it up to the states. And you know this, you have all this inequity throughout our country, right? You have some states where women have access, and you have that today. You have some states that have already codified access, and others that haven't. And so you already have this disproportionate and unequal access for women all over our country now, based on their zip code, based on what state they live in. And it's so unbelievably unfair that if you don't have the resources to travel to another state to get the healthcare that you need, you're going to go without. It's just unbelievable to me that we're in this moment in time.
Right. And following up on what you said about the governor's current actions to help take out that 1931 law, is there anything that mayors in cities in Michigan can do to help support Governor Whitmer and her cause?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it'll be decided at the court level. And you probably know this, judges have their own ethics, and many of them that you talk to will tell you that they're not influenced by public opinion. So I think it's important that we express that support, and I think many of us have done that, but ultimately it'll be a judicial decision. And I think the frustration is on the other side. That's exactly what we heard from the Supreme Court when they overturned Roe v. Wade, is that they're not influenced by public opinion, even though polling clearly shows the majority of Americans support a woman's right to choose, support a woman's privacy to make that decision between her and her doctor. And that didn't seem to carry any weight with our current Supreme Court.
Definitely, yeah. And you have established yourself as very clearly as a proponent of environmental sustainability here in Grand Rapids, earning many awards and certifications for your efforts. Where exactly is our city on the road to sustainability, and what more needs to be done for us to reach our maximum potential in terms of protecting the environment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I think of our efforts around environmental sustainability, I think of them as multifaceted. So we have some very clear goals for the organization itself. So the City of Grand Rapids as an organization, we're a $550 million organization. We have lots of departments, lots of buildings. We have a water utility. So we have very clear goals for our organization. One of them being to get 100% of our energy from renewable sources and then get to carbon neutrality. So we have internal plans on how do we get there. Right now, we are at about 41% of our energy we get from renewable sources. We recently opened a solar array at our Lake Michigan filtration plant, so that helped us move up about 6%. We're building a biodigester where we're taking waste, food waste, and we're turning that into renewable natural gas that will actually be pumped into DTE's pipes. And then we're going to use that renewable natural gas for our rapid buses and some city vehicles. So again, how do we create energy and then use that energy? And how do we take waste and turn it into energy? So that's been a very exciting project, about an $84 million project. And then we're in the process right now of converting all of our street lights to LED lights. So that will not only save us money, but it'll save a significant amount of energy. So we're actively making investments here internally at the city to meet those goals. A big project we're working on right now is to add a massive solar array to the Butterworth landfill. And if we can accomplish that, we're going to be pretty close to that 100%. And then we're working with community partners, because part of, in my opinion, reversing climate change, which is what we need to do, is working in partnership with our community partners to get there. So for instance, another goal we have is to add trees. So I've been working really hard to add thousands of trees throughout our city. We know that's good for air quality. We know that's good for the environment, but we only have so much public land. So we need people to plant trees on their private property. So that has to be a partnership if we're really going to reach our 40% tree canopy. We've invested a lot of money into green infrastructure when it comes to our bioswales, water retention, moving towards green infrastructure instead of gray infrastructure. And we've done a lot of that on public land, but we also need private property owners to do that as well. And then we have a lot of old housing stock in the city, and we need to upgrade that housing stock to make them more energy efficient. So there's a number of things that we're working on, but ultimately we need, if we're going to, as a community, as a whole community, move the needle on climate change, we need to do that together.
Right. And speaking directly about the infrastructure bill that was passed a couple of months ago by the federal government, is there any way that the funding that was included in those packages has impacted Grand Rapids specifically?
Yeah, well, hopefully it will. As of right now, we really haven't seen the bulk of those dollars allocated yet. So there's a big pot of money through the infrastructure bill that was allocated to energy efficiency block grants. And so we're still waiting on the department to finalize that formula before we actually get any of the funds. So some of it is still in the works, I should say, but I am hopeful that a lot of those dollars are going to get to local communities where we can start investing them by the end of the year, or at least have a plan to invest them over the next several years. But I think what you'll see is investments in access to broadband, some additional utilities that are being replaced. So even in the city of Grand Rapids, we're replacing lead lines for homes, and we're trying to get rid of lead pipes. And the infrastructure package will help us accelerate a lot of that work.
Right. And on a more personal level, you're the first female mayor of Grand Rapids, which is definitely progress, a step in the right direction. But with progress, there's always something to push back that tests your strength to keep moving. So, have you ever faced any gender bias, and how have you handled those situations?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. I think if you ask any woman who's in a position of leadership, especially if they're the first, or if it's a field that is dominated by men, they have their own stories and struggles. From comments that are made that are inappropriate to people being much more critical of me and how I dress and what I look like than my predecessor. Some personal attacks, threats that I doubt my predecessor had to deal with that are much more along the sexist lines. And how I deal with it, it kind of depends on what it is. Some of the things I have to just not take personal. And I can't let it chip away at my confidence. And then if it is something that's directed to me by someone I'm with, so if I'm at a meeting and somebody says something inappropriate, or somebody says something demeaning to me, either publicly or privately, based on my relationship with that person, I almost always address it with them. And my practice is that I don't do it publicly. I don't want people to feel shamed or embarrassed. But I also don't want them to do it again. And I need to let them know that it's not okay. So typically what I do is I have a private conversation with people. And most often, unless it's a pattern or a repeated practice, most often I really give people the benefit of the doubt. So I say, I'm sure you didn't mean it this way, but let me tell you how I perceived it and why I find it sexist or biased. And for the most part, people have been pretty receptive to that. And then we can have a conversation. And I always say, because relationships are so critical in this work, you really need to build relationships and have relationships if you're going to accomplish anything, because you can't do anything alone. I can't even get anything passed on my commission alone, right? I need 4 votes. So relationships are really, really important. And I always tell people when I'm challenging them or confronting them, I always tell them that our relationship is meaningful to me. And relationships have difficult conversations sometimes, and that's okay.
That was the most perfect way to have a difficult conversation. That's like the formula to have a good conversation with someone.
It's been pretty effective so far.
I should write that down somewhere. And like you were talking about former Mayor George Hartwell, when you were elected mayor in 2016, you succeeded former Mayor Hartwell, who was very supportive of your campaign. Was there any advice or wisdom that he told you that still sticks with you today, 6 years later?
Yes, and I wish I would have heeded his advice a little bit more when I first got elected. He told me I needed to learn how to say no. And he told me, going from a city commissioner to mayor, you get stretched and you get pulled in a lot of directions. And if you're not careful, pretty soon your time is not your own. And the list of things that you wanted to accomplish are really hard to accomplish because you don't have the time to do it. And so I think my first year, I really struggled with that. And now I'm much better at that.
And on a lighter note, to end things off, the Grand Rapids Brewing Company created a drink called the Rosalynn Bliss Blonde, and I've always wanted a Ben & Jerry's flavor named after me, but this is just as great. So, how does it feel to have a beverage named after you, and have you ever tasted it?
Yes. Okay. So I was a city commissioner when they did that, and I was very honored. I tend to like craft beer, but also, Grand Rapids has been honored and recognized for being Beer City USA and having all these craft brewers. So I was very honored by it. I have had a drink of it. It's very good. But then I felt like it was a little more deserving once I was elected mayor, because then it was a little bit more historic with me being the first female mayor. Before that, it just said under it, a city commissioner who loves craft beer. At least now it says first female mayor of the city of Grand Rapids.
It's like a step up. Would you like to have a Ben & Jerry's flavor named after you?
Oh, you know what? So I don't eat ice cream, and I don't have a sweet tooth. So I think if I was going to have something else named after me, it would probably be something salty, like popcorn. So popcorn is my go-to. And that would be pretty cool.
That would be very cool. And in case you did like ice cream, if Mr. Ben and Mr. Jerry are watching this, just a recommendation, but chocolate bliss.
Ooh, I like it.
That was a bad
joke.
It. Sorry.
What would your ice cream be named after you? What would you call it?
Do you have any recommendations? My first name is Krishna and my last name is Mano. Maybe something off of that.
How about do you like marshmallows?
Yeah.
Marshmallows?
Marshmano?
Mano, yeah.
That's smart.
Or
ice cream en el mano, Spanish twist.
Ooh, there you go. There you go.
Thank you, Mayor Bliss, for joining us on today's episode of the show, and I wish you the best of luck for handling the problems and threats to American democracy that we face today.
Thank you. It was wonderful spending time with you. I can't wait to meet you face to face.
Thank you.